Apparently we're live here on the Will Cain Show today on a day of authenticity, a day of technical troubles. One, it is the end of the first period because all of my mind is on hockey. It's the end of the first period in the Trump trial in New York. So where do we stand today? Two, let's name some names. As Columbia's graduation is interrupted, Michigan's graduation is interrupted. Who is behind the student protest? Who's giving them the money? The parallels, and even in the names, harken back to 1968. And three, authenticity, as exhibited by our technical difficulties today, is the currency. And Sydney Sweeney has a couple of assets. Let's revisit and react to our conversation, our very popular episode with YouTube's Nerdrotic. It is the Will Cain Show, streaming live at foxnews.com, on the Fox News YouTube channel, the Fox News Facebook page, and always on demand wherever you get your audio entertainment, at Apple, Spotify, or Fox News Podcast, or you can subscribe on YouTube. I assume, because I don't know what's going on right now. I don't know what's happening. This is it. This is real, I guess. I'm not convinced that my audio works. I'm not sure that I can hear anything. So I don't know. I don't know what we're doing here. I don't know. We're flying by the seat of our pants. We may be doing a show, maybe not. Who knows? Let's see. I'm told that we are streaming live, which is news to me, some 10, 15 minutes late. And I'm not convinced I'm going to be able to hear anything, including my guests here today on the Will Cain Show. But she's been waiting patiently through technical difficulties. So let's see if it's going to work. Let's start with story number one. Kerri Kupec Urbahn is a Fox News legal editor. She does a great job of covering everything legal, including the Donald Trump trials in New York for Fox News. I was with her on Fox and Friends the other weekend. I was super impressed with all of her legal analysis. Wanted to get her on the show. And I can see you, Kerri. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to hear you.
I can hear you.
Oh, it's a miracle of some technology. That we got you here today on the Will Cain Show. Thanks to the audience for being patient. Thank you for Kerri for being patient. So I was joking. I'm consumed as often am with sports, and I'm consumed with hockey right now. So, there's only 3 periods in hockey. I was thinking, well, we're not halfway into the Donald Trump trial in New York, but we're kind of a third maybe. So I think what I need to do, I think what many of us need to do is sort of just take a moment now, almost like the studio show between the first period and the second period, and say, where are we? Like, how is this going? The prosecution's still putting on witnesses. There's still many of the heavy hitters left to go, Stormy Daniels and Michael Cohen. But as you stand today, how do you think the prosecution has done in its case against Donald Trump?
Well, they haven't proved that he's done anything illegal yet, which is the whole point being in court. The former president is on the first to stand as in a criminal trial. And you'd think that if a state or the federal government was going to bring a case against the leader of the free world and possibly the next one again, that they'd have an airtight, rock solid case. And they have the opposite of that. We've heard a lot about catch and kill schemes, which is when a media company buys the rights to a story, it doesn't publish it, not illegal. We've heard a lot about compensation for a nondisclosure agreement, also perfectly legal, not a problem. People may think it's sleazy, but it happens all the time, and there's nothing illegal about it. And we've heard a lot about his desire to suppress bad stories about himself, which, again, not illegal, and we're in the court. So it's unclear where they're going, Will, other than I think they're continuing to look for a crime as they go, which, of course, is the opposite of how the justice system should be operating in America. So
the crux of having to prove a crime here will be they have to prove a felony because the misdemeanors have run their statute of limitations, right? And in order to prove that it's a felony, they're going to have to prove, it would seem, Kerri, that his intent, as you said, in suppressing stories, not a crime, but his intent was to subvert an election, right? And how do they do that? Like, how do they prove, even if they prove that, he made payments to Stormy Daniels or to Michael Cohen to facilitate them to Stormy Daniels, how do they prove that that was done in furtherance of an election?
Well, right. And that's the problem, I think, on its face with the New York state law that's at issue here. And the law says something like it is, so for somebody to promote a candidate by unlawful means is a crime. But the question is, promote a candidate, well, what does that look like exactly? And as far as unlawful means, it's very vague on its face. So effectively, a prosecutor could write into the law what they want it to be as they go along. Now, I will say this, while the misdemeanors have run on the 34 counts of falsifying the business records, they still have to establish that, though. I mean, they can't have one without the other. And so the reason that matters, and the reason I'm drawing our attention back to that, is because these payments to Stormy Daniels were classified in Donald Trump's personal ledger book by his accountant as a legal expense or a retainer. And the reality is that compensation given for someone signing a non-disclosure agreement could be characterized as a legal expense. In fact, I thought it was very interesting that last week the lawyer for Karen McDougal and Stormy McDaniels was on the stand. His name is Keith Davidson, and he refused to call the payments to his client, then client Stormy Daniels, as hush money payments. He said, well, no, it was consideration, which is a fancy legal term for something that you get in exchange for a contract. You abide by a promise. So he's calling it consideration. Donald Trump's bookkeeper called it, a legal expense. And I guess the state would like him to have said reimbursement to Michael Cohen for Stormy Daniels, but it's really all one and the same thing. So they have to establish that even before they get to this underlying, concealing of a crime, which is a felony, which again remains unclear exactly what that was.
All right. So, but Kerri, so you're an attorney, and I mean, I went to law school, which makes me just dangerous enough to be stupid on this. But so in the normal course of business, and I'm just curious on this, if you were going to make a non-disclosure agreement, would the client make that agreement directly with the subject and then therefore make the payment directly to the subject, or would they do that facilitated through their lawyers and then have the expense umbrellaed as legal expense? Because that's what Donald Trump did the second, right? It was all funneled through the attorney as a legal expense. Would that be a normal course of business?
Yeah, it would be. And in fact, to your question, which is a great one, the lawyers have, or Keith Davidson, again, the lawyer for McDaniels and Karen McDougal, testified that he worked directly with Michael Cohen. And I thought this was a very interesting point of his testimony. He said, and again, I think this is important, he wasn't sure that Cohen even had the authority to be making this payment to him, to Stormy Daniels, that it was just done between the two of them. Keith Davidson never had any interaction with Donald Trump himself. And again, that's important because Donald Trump is the one currently on trial, not Michael Cohen. And then whether Cohen even had the authority to do this or he was just taking care of stuff for Donald Trump as his, quote, fixer is unclear.
So, but when you say normal course of business, we would see other attorneys conducting another business this way.
Between each other, of course. Lawyers negotiating a contract between, of course, that would be the normal way of doing things. So,
and then making the payments directly themselves, I'm saying, and then billing the client under legal expense.
It really depends on how one classifies a retainer. Right? So it goes to the heart of the state's case. So if if you pay someone a retainer, that can include a lot of expenses. And, it depends on how much the client wants those expenses itemized within the retainer. So if Michael Cohen was tasked with fixing problems and he decided that he was going to go all in, and that included in his mind to pay off Stormy Daniels because he thought that would hurt his boss, Donald Trump, he could have done that without consulting with Trump. It would be surprising, frankly, if he hadn't consulted with Donald Trump, because that's a lot of money. And that obviously is a point of contention between the state and prosecution right now. The prosecution and the defense. And that came up with Hope Hicks's testimony on Friday, where she said it was hard to believe that Michael Cohen would have done this out of the goodness of his heart, given that he wasn't a charitable character and Donald Trump was likely to have known. But even then, even if Donald Trump knew and worked it out with Cohen, who then paid Stormy Daniels, it's not illegal.
Right. And so I'm focused on the misdemeanors, like you said, because first you build the misdemeanor, then you build the felony. Right. They have to go hand in hand. In the misdemeanor charges, 34 counts of fraudulent business transactions, right? They should have been classified as whatever, NDAs. Instead, and in public, we're all saying hush money, but this is the prosecution. This is the prosecution's argument, right?
Right.
They should have been classified as NDAs. You classified them as attorney's fees, retainer, so that you could hide that you made these NDAs. And it would seem to me, if the defense could say, this is done often. The way that these business records were
Right.
calculated, not calculated, but transacted and recorded, the way they were recorded is often done. And if it's often done, then it's not a fraudulent business transaction.
Right. And the other thing they would have to prove, again, the standard is beyond a reasonable doubt. The prosecution has to prove that Trump had actual knowledge of how these payments were even classified. And again, that's putting aside the fact whether the legal expense classification is even legally problematic, but they still would have to prove that he knew. And that's also unclear given the fact that my understanding of the case thus far is that the person who labeled them as legal expenses was somebody at Trump Tower. I think she may have been an accounts payable supervisor or someone who was lower in the chain, so to speak. And whether Donald Trump even knew what she wrote in the book is unclear. And maybe Michael Cohen's going to testify that she did. But again, then it comes down to Michael Cohen versus Donald Trump.
And so what we're talking about is whether or not they can prove beyond a reasonable doubt that these were fraudulent business transactions. Then there's the next step. Well, even if they were capable of proving these misdemeanors, he's guilty of these misdemeanors, in order for it to be a conviction at the end of this trial, they would also then have to prove the felony side of this, right? Which is that it was fraudulent business transactions to influence an election. Is that what the implication is?
Well, it's to conceal another crime. It's even broader than what you're saying. And it appears that the other crime is related to this New York state law that they have cited, which makes it a misdemeanor, by the way, not even a felony, but once you combine the misdemeanor plus the misdemeanor, you get the felony for purposes of what they're doing here. That it is to influence an election, to promote a candidate by, quote, unlawful means is a crime. So that's what they seem to be honing in on. But again, what are the unlawful means? Unclear. And number two, if it's a federal campaign violation, which would make sense given that he was running for federal office, the president of the United States, they don't have jurisdiction over that. They don't. It's a state court. And secondly, the Department of Justice declined to bring that kind of campaign violation against Donald Trump when they had the chance. So they don't have jurisdictions to bring it. The Department of Justice declined to bring it, who had the proper jurisdiction, which means we're only left with this vague New York state law, which is unlawful means, influencing election. What are those unlawful means? The state has not yet proved that case.
Well, wouldn't the unlawful means be the misdemeanor fraudulent business transactions? So that's what they're saying is the unlawful means of influencing election, right?
I mean, but in what sense? If it's classified as a legal expense, the NDA itself is not illegal. It's, the fact, think about it, that what they're doing is they're looking they're looking through the books, the codes in New York and looking for something they can find where they can match Trump's behavior with this very vague statute when the thing itself, which is the contract and the NDA, is not inherently illegal and it is a legal document, thus a legal expense.
For those watching, maybe like, okay, you're getting caught up in the all the charges, but this is what it's all about, because then every witness that takes the stand, Kerri, has value in so much as, this is how it should work. It may just work that all the witnesses are there to try to influence how the jurors feel about Donald Trump, but that I can't analyze as well. Assuming that the jurors are listening to testimony and how their testimony proves the charges, I'm just trying to take what's happened so far and what is expected to happen as far as what Hope Hicks had to say, what David Pecker had to say, what Michael Cohen will have to say in terms of proving, A, that these were fraudulent business transactions, these NDAs were recorded fraudulently, and B, that they were unlawful in influencing an election. So I'm trying to anticipate, when's the big moment that if you and I are sitting here, not at the end of the first period, but we're sitting here at the end of 3 periods, did the testimony add up to the charges?
Yeah, I don't know that we're ever going to see it, although the state is determined to have that moment. I do think it's bad for them when every single witness thus far has had only negative things to say about Michael Cohen, who is their star witness. Michael Cohen, of course, who has lied in court, lied to the media, lied to Congress. If I'm the prosecution, I'm not feeling so great that the the path that has been paved for Michael Cohen is all bad, whereas actually a number of these witnesses have had good things to say about Donald Trump. And, some of the bombshell, I've seen some of this reporting on a bombshell testimony, bad for Donald Trump. And I'm thinking, what bombshell testimony? Are we sitting in the same courtroom? If bombshell testimony is Hope Hicks testifying on Friday that the Access Hollywood story was bad for his campaign, I mean, everybody knew that. You don't have to, be a publicist or go to law school to know that that was going to be damaging to his campaign. And that she's his press secretary. Of course it was. And she had to deal with it. Or the fact even that Donald Trump may have known what the payment to Cohen, that he knew what Cohen was doing. Again, even if he did. And I'm surprised, to be honest, that the defense isn't owning this more. I don't know why, as a matter of strategy, the defense just hasn't said, yeah, Trump knew. This is what he did, and there's no legal problem. It's perfectly fine.
And I think we've had this conversation. I know I've said this, like, if you did that, if you said, yeah, Trump knew and he did this, and by the way, he's done it a lot.
Right.
He's made NDAs about stories that are not favorable to him. It would almost inoculate him from the idea that he did it to unlawfully interfere in an election.
Right. And what, again, is unlawfully interfering? I mean, conspiracy to influence an election is also called running for office but it is, right? And so it's like, at what point, who's drawing this line, this legal line, and what is it exactly? You can't just say, well, he did it unlawfully and then hope it sticks. Well, you have to prove what he did illegally. And I don't think that, they've done that yet.
And every politician, to your point, like, every politician's done this, right? Made stories go away, probably for consideration,
Right.
and then not screamed from the mountaintop, here's what I did. I mean, didn't Hillary Clinton have an on-the-nose situation like this where I think it was through Mark Elias?
Yes. But she was
where they've made
about
stories
it.
go away.
Right. What she did was, and this is how she got away with it, was that she had her lawyers, handle the dirty work. Then the lawyers got immunity and were able to talk about what happened. But because they were the ones who did it, it wasn't, she wasn't charged. She wasn't part of that. And that's the same. And so, one thing that has just been surprising to me in this trial is how determined the state seems to be to equate dirty with illegal in the minds of jurors. When I was at the Department of Justice, people would get frustrated with Bill Barr. That's who I worked for not prosecuting certain fan favorites on the right, by the way. This was coming from the right. We took a lot of incoming on the right on this kind of stuff. And, I would constantly be defending our decisions in the court of public opinion. And I would be having conversations with people saying, just because something is dirty doesn't make it illegal. And I think that's what we're seeing again here in New York. But we're in a court of law. Elements need to be proved, and the standard is beyond a reasonable doubt.
And that's what I'm focused on, like, because I went to law school, maybe because I like the law.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like math.
Right.
Not that I like math, but here are the set of elements.
Right.
Here is the proof. It should add up together to an equation. For a juror, that should add up. The equation should be, does it prove it beyond a reasonable doubt? So looking forward really quickly, you'll get the headliners soon, maybe this week, right? Stormy Daniels, Michael Cohen. In your mind, Kerri, what could they say that would be a bombshell in terms of proving the elements against Donald Trump?
Well, I think what Michael Cohen is going to say, because clearly this is what the state is building up towards, is that, he and Donald Trump had this elaborate conspiracy together where they were going to influence the election in this illegal way by paying this off and not reporting it as, again, this is where it gets, I think, very strange and murky, if this is what the state is trying to do, as like a campaign contribution to himself, which doesn't really make sense considering it was his personal attorney. He can pay out of it from his personal funds, no problem there. I think that's what he's going to do. But here's the thing that it's confusing as well. You can't conspire with yourself. So why hasn't anyone else been charged with conspiracy if that is part of the state's plan? Because in their opening arguments, they talked a lot about, they used the word conspiracy in this very scary way. And I thought, again, that's obscuring the issue to the jurors because no one else has been charged with that. And conspiracy in and of itself is not legally problematic unless you tie on some illegal conduct to that. And I'm still not clear what the illegal conduct here is.
All right. Will we see Stormy Daniels and Michael Cohen this week?
We don't know. We don't know until they walk in. We've not been provided with that information in advance, so it's possible, but we'll have to see.
Well, last question. Will all of this add up, Kerri? Like, again, in a way, it's not naivety, it's idealism. Like, the law is logic. Right. That's what I like about it, not math. It's logic. Mm-hmm. Logic is often A plus B equals C. Will it be that way, Kerri, at the end, or is this whole thing designed to make Donald Trump look bad? I'm not even talking about outside the courtroom, inside the courtroom. Make him look bad to jurors that will decide this emotionally. I like him or I don't like him, guilty or innocent.
Mm-hmm. Look, I think that's always the name of the game in these kinds of trials. But I am very interested to know what the lawyers on that jury are thinking.
Those two lawyers.
Yes. Yeah, because they know better than anyone. Got to have a crime, got to have evidence. There's a standard beyond a reasonable doubt. And even the fact that both David Pecker, who was the publisher of the National Enquirer, and Hope Hicks, his former comms director and press secretary, testified that Donald Trump was upset about the Stormy Daniels story having an impact on Melania and his family. And that was stressful to him, that their opinion mattered to him. That also undercuts the state's theme, which is he did this purely for the election. Well, what if both are true? What if he did it for the election and he was also upset about the impact it would have on his family? Doesn't that cast doubt on beyond a reasonable doubt he only did this to influence the election, right? And so these are the kinds of things I think I would hope at least the jurors are considering as the state, I think, again, remains determined to conflate dirty with illegal in their minds.
Well, I know you've been down there. I know you've been in the courtroom. You probably got to get back. So first of all, thank you for doing this today. Thanks for being patient through the mess that was the start of this show today. Your feedback is awesome on this whole story, Kerri. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. There's Kerri Kupec Urbahn, Fox News legal editor and an attorney. All right, let's take a breather. What is going on? I'm going to throw another. Can you guys get on the air? Can 2 days?
I'm here. Yeah.
What's going on? What is
we
going on with this show today?
We had some technical issues. We're working through it. We're live. We got, people are watching and they're on the chat and they like the conversation.
4 months we've been doing this show, and today's the first day that we just step on a landmine and the whole thing blows up. What happened?
It's a very Monday type show. It happens once in a while. It's all technical stuff, and I don't want to get into the technical nitty-gritty.
No, I want
on the
names.
weekend. Someone was here over the weekend because things were
That's
touched.
what I want, James.
Someone's
I want
touching
the names.
stuff. Yeah.
Well, we come in here and there's the camera that is on us was covered with a piece of paper. So
somebody messed with the studio over the weekend. You guys show up late. I'm just joking. I jumped on 5 minutes ahead of time, and that's when we realized there's a problem. And you need to figure out, oh, look. Oh, my gosh. Your camera, did you take the piece of paper off the camera?
I did. Now we're not covered by the piece of paper, so it's interesting. We're doing our best, and we're working here. We got no lights on, but, I don't know what's happening there.
We need names of who sabotaged the Will Cain Show studio over the weekend.
It's probably conspiracy, Patrick. Patrick, where are you? No, I'm kidding.
Tinfoil pack. Can you play video today?
I could play video. I could put up graphics. I could do all the things.
All right.
Like you can see us right now, right?
Yeah, I can see you.
Okay.
In the pursuit of authenticity and leaning into, I told the people at Fox and Friends this one time. I said, stop trying to produce perfect television. Perfect television is boring. Well, we definitely tested that today here on the Will Cain Show.
Yep.
But you just got to just be real. As we're going to talk about in a minute, our guest from last week, Nerdrotic, hugely popular on YouTube, said authenticity is the currency. So here's the deal. We're being real. So a lot of people have questioned whether or not I was real on Fox and Friends. This was like 2 months ago when I did a diner in Texas, and this went down. Watch this. NBC just reported that Michelle Obama has said she will not run for president.
Thank God.
Okay.
Yes.
Ainsley said, I would love the reaction from a woman in the crowd. And
I would vote for a woman, and especially, Nikki Haley. I'm just going to say this. She's probably menopausal. We don't need that.
Okay. She said, how about we vote for people regardless of their gender, just the right person for the job for America? Okay. So that went viral because no, Will, that's not what she said. She said, we don't need someone postmenopausal. She didn't say this touchy-feely thing you said about regardless of their gender. Here's the deal. So I'm going to admit to you this. That was a curveball. Okay. The menopause thing was a curveball. I didn't see it coming when I've got a mic in her face. And I want to say, doing this, when you're talking to people real and live in the moment, Alexis McAdams has been doing an awesome job on Fox. She's a reporter. She's been in the middle of these protests at Columbia, other places, and just very naturally walking through the crowd, interacting with Jesse Waters, interacting with the camera, and talking to people, many of whom are hostile and will not talk to her, and just being real. She's doing such a great job. And so that's what's happening in moments like that. And I wasn't lying. And people are like, oh, the Fox News. Before we went on camera, I was talking to this lady, right? And she was saying to me, we should be voting on people regardless of gender. Who cares if Nikki's a female and Trump's a male? She was saying the things that I said. When the camera came on, I put the microphone in her face. She had a point she wanted to make about menopause. And by the way, she said herself, I'm postmenopausal. Trust me, I know we don't want someone who is. She was kind of talking about herself and being funny. But I'll admit, it was a curveball when she said that. And I was like, well, I don't really have much on menopause. So here's what she had to say before we went on camera. I could have been more smooth and said that and told the audience exactly this happened before we went on camera. But I wasn't just spinning what she had to say and making stuff up. But that's what you get when you're being real. You get that in a show that starts 15 minutes late and is a total mess. But you will also get something you won't get anywhere else, which is I'm going to name names. They canceled Columbia's graduation. This stuff has been in the plan for months. If you wonder whether or not this is going to look like 1968, whether or not the Democratic National Convention is going to be protested, and I don't say this kind of stuff, I don't throw this term around, pro-Hamas. I've got the goods of why it's pro-Hamas and who's behind it and who's funding this entire uprising next on The Will Cain Show.
Kudlow on Fox Business is now on the go for podcast fans. Download the Kudlow Show podcast every weekday at foxbusinesspodcasts.com. Kudlow covers the latest headlines and business trends with an emphasis on the financial impact facing households and businesses across the country. Listen to interviews with key business newsmakers. The Kudlow podcast will be available on the go after the show every weekday at foxbusinesspodcasts.com or wherever you download your favorite podcasts. Did you hear the news? Now you can. With instant updates from Fox News for Amazon Alexa, breaking stories and top headlines, the economy, and so much more. Brought to you by Fox News, America's #1 cable news network. Plus, setup couldn't be easier because everything's ready to go in the app. Just say,
Alexa, play news from Fox.
In Fox News.
It's the latest when you need it, on demand, from Fox News and Amazon Alexa.
I'm Dana Perino, and this is Perino on Politics.
Dana Perino, co-host of The Five and co-anchor of America's Newsroom, returns to Fox News Audio with a brand new podcast, Perino on Politics. Listeners of Everything Will Be Okay will be thrilled by the return of a familiar voice, but with a fresh spin as Dana guides audiences through the 2024 election cycle. Make sure you subscribe to this series wherever you download podcasts and leave a rating and review.
All right, coming up, if authenticity is currency, then let's authentically go through the comments of our interview last week with Nerdrotic of YouTube fame. I made some mistakes, but we also got some awesome feedback here on the Will Cain Show, streaming live on YouTube and foxnews.com, the Fox News Facebook page. Subscribe at Apple, Spotify, or right now, right here. I promise it'll be unique by subscribing on YouTube. Over the weekend, University of Michigan saw commencement, graduation, university-wide graduation, interrupted by protesters, anti-Israel, pro-Hamas protesters that stood for the entirety of that graduation. They were not ushered out. They were not kicked out. No, instead, what is done is these protesters have been accommodated. And Columbia University has canceled their university-wide commencement, knowing that they too would be subject to these types of protests. And it has led so many people in my life personally and out there in social, who's behind this stuff? Like, this is organized. This is not springing up overnight. The cops in New York, the NYPD, has said this is highly organized. Flyers, funding. And I've had people say to me, well, who's behind it? So let's dive into it. Let's talk about exactly what's happening in these protests. In a Wall Street Journal report, these protests have been in the making for months, through largely the National Students for Justice in Palestine. It has about 300 chapters across the country. It's about 2 decades old, this organization. And starting some months ago, SJP, and in the case of Columbia, a few other organizations like Samidoun, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, Samidoun, Palestinian Prisoner Solidarity Network, it's based out of Canada, started organizing teach-ins for the student leaders in Columbia. Now, the reason I tell you that is to know this. These was a 2-hour session with a Samidoun coordinator, Charlotte Cates. She encouraged students to, quote, build an international popular cradle of resistance. This is a recording that's posted here on YouTube. Now, listen to this quote from Charlotte Cates. There is nothing wrong with being a member of Hamas, being a leader of Hamas, being a fighter in Hamas. These are the people that are on the front lines defending Palestine. Now, like I was talking about with Kerri, Kupec, Urbahn, I like to add up the elements. I don't like to run to the most extreme characterization as always possible. And I have not been someone who said these protests are pro-Hamas. Anti-Israel, perhaps. This shows you that the organization behind these protests is specifically preaching them a message that is not just anti-Israel, not just about the policies regarding Gaza, but that is pro-Hamas, a terrorist network that conducted the October 7th horrific slaughters. Pro-Hamas in their own words. Still, how did this get organized? Well, the same Wall Street Journal report says the people behind the organization included former Black Panthers from the 1968 protesters, the 1960s protesters and 70s. The students themselves participated in the BLM protests, so that many of the same ones had experience of this just a few years ago. And they were funded, Students Justice for Palestine, by an organization called Westpac, Westchester-based nonprofit led by a guy named Howard Horowitz, Jewish, by the way. Jewish Justice for Peace, or Jewish Voices for Peace. It's another organization. It's fascinating that many of the organizations helping fund these protests are actually Jewish. I don't know what that says when you see a pro-Hamas, clearly anti-Semitic message, part of what you are funding. But the fact that Black Panthers are involved, and former Black Panthers, and these organizations have been organizing for months on campus, it brings to mind the parallels to 1968. Now, a lot of people have talked about this, and Pete Hegseth and I did this off the wall on Fox and Friends this weekend. I want you to just listen to this. In 1968, Lyndon Baines Johnson was running for re-election as the Democratic nominee for president. He was the sitting president in the United States. His approval rating stood at 36%. In 2024, Joe Biden is the Democratic nominee for president. He is the sitting president, and his approval rating sits at 38%. In 1968, Robert F. Kennedy entered the race on the Democratic side to run against Joe Biden. In 2004, RFK Jr. is running against Joe Biden. In 1968, students started protesting across campus in America, largely centered around the war in Vietnam. In 2024, students across the country on college campuses protesting against the war in Israel, against Gaza, against Hamas. In 68, students chanted, "Hey, hey, ho, ho, LBJ has got to go." In 24, they chant, "Genocide Joe." In fact, there was a huge display at one of these universities on top of an American flag of Joe Biden's face Underneath it said Genocide Joe. In 68, the protests were largely at Columbia, or notably at Columbia, and took over physically occupied Hamilton Hall. In 2024, at Columbia, physically occupying Hamilton Hall. In 68, the protests spilled over to the Democratic National Convention in Chicago. In 2024, the Democratic National Convention is once again in Chicago, and preparations are being made for inevitable protest, including at this point, permitting them some 4 miles away from the convention. In 68, ultimately, LBJ dropped out. Hubert Humphrey, his vice president, ran for president, lost to Richard Nixon. And speculation is constantly centered around, if poll numbers remain like this for Joe Biden, does he drop out? And if the historical parallels maintain, that would be Kamala Harris running for president. But I promised you names. So Westpac, Students for Justice in Palestine. Who is funding these organizations? Well, new reporting shows that one of the major funders for this group is the Tides Foundation. The Tides Foundation, at one time run by Bill and Melinda Gates, funded by George Soros, funded by the Pritzker family. You know Soros, you know Gates, Pritzker family, Hyatt Hotels fortune, Governor of Illinois, J.B. Pritzker. The Pritzker family helping fund these organizations. By the way, also the Rockefeller brothers are another funder of Students for Justice in Palestine. Who are the Rockefeller brothers? That's a fund. The Rockefeller Brothers Fund is 5 third-generation Rockefeller brothers, John, Nelson, Lawrence, Winthrop, it's like out of Trading Places, and David. It is distinct from the Rockefeller Foundation. It's the Rockefeller Brothers Foundation, along with the Tides Foundation, funding much of this. Now, here's what's fascinating. Those same names, those same foundations, those same families funding the Democratic Party, funding Joe Biden. Joe Biden's same funders are funding an uprising that is largely going to hurt and could upend Joe Biden. There are the names. There are the people behind the funding and organization of what you see happening across America on college campuses. And you could soon see, if the parallels hold to 1968, at the Democratic National Convention. All right. Hugely successful Will Cain Show last week with Nerdrotic. We talked a lot about pop culture. He gave me some recommendations on TV shows I should watch, and I started one over the weekend, and I am very pleased. But we got a lot of feedback online about that interview. So let's go through some of it next on The Will Cain Show.
Stay on top of the latest forecast with America's Weather Team in the palm of your hands.
Here's the latest from America's Weather Center.
It's Fox weather updates throughout your busy day, every day.
That heat's going to be out there for one more day.
Temperatures being 30 degrees above average.
Put the power of over 100 meteorologists and the worldwide resources of Fox in your hands with the Fox Weather Podcast. Precise, personal, powerful. Subscribe and listen now at foxnewspodcasts.com. Pete Hegseth's eye-opening new book, The War on Warriors.
The army I fought for has gone woke, and it's time to fix that.
The veteran and Fox and Friends weekend host exposes the problems in today's military.
How a far-left ideology has infiltrated the system and is putting our entire country at risk.
With critical insight into the changes that need to happen in the Pentagon and America before it's too late. The War on Warriors by best-selling author Pete Hegseth. Order now at foxnewsbooks.com.
It's time to take the quiz. 5 questions, 5 minutes a day, 5 days a week.
History, pop culture, science, sports, civics. How much do you know? Let's find out.
Who was the first person to walk on the moon?
Jackson or something?
Neil Armstrong.
Take the quiz every weekday at thequiz.fox and then listen to the quiz podcast to find out how you did.
Play, share, and of course, listen to the quiz right now at thequiz.fox.
All right, welcome back to the Will Cain Show. We're going to run through some of the feedback you gave us last week regarding our interview with Nerdrotic. The Will Cain Show streaming live, if we're lucky and everything works out, on YouTube, on foxnews.com, and on the Fox News Facebook page, but always on demand, Apple, Spotify, or by subscribing on YouTube. Real quick, I just got done with all this funding and organization behind the campus protests. You got to hear Maxine Waters on MSNBC. Just listen to this clip for one moment. Watch.
This is a man who we better be careful about. And I tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to ask the Justice Department and I'm going to ask the president to tell us what they're going to do to protect this country against violence if he loses. I want to know about all of those right-wing organizations that he's connected with, who are training up in the hills somewhere and targeting, what communities they're going to attack.
Right-wing organizations Donald Trump is connected to, training up in the hills for an attack. That's Congresswoman Maxine Waters on MSNBC. Now, I'm going to tell you, I'm not plugged in with the groups training in the hills, so maybe I don't know anything about that. But this is what they're running with. This is what they're saying. This is what they're accusing Americans of, while we lay out the evidence of the training and funding of the unrest right now on college campuses, the pro-Hamas, anti-Semitic unrest across college campuses. The nerve always is the case. It's always the case that they are guilty of the sins that they accuse others of guilt. Always is the case. All right. Big successful interview last week with Nerdrotic. You can find him on YouTube, over 1 million subscribers, who reviews pop culture. Because we had a lot of feedback regarding that interview. Comment section was lit up, and I want to go through some of it with you guys. First, let's start right here. Arcane5260 says, Will Cain is one of the decent ones, so good that he had Nerdrotic Gary Beaker, on regardless of the reviews gaming line. Then Griever Platt says, Gary reviewing gaming when he's not busy trying to open doors for 3 hours in games. He's talking about something like Minecraft or any other video game, I'm sure, where you can't open a door. And then Jeremiah Hernandez says, LMAO, every time Will mentions Gary as a gamer, did Gary tell him he isn't off air? So I did say that. I set Gary up as a gaming expert, and the comments were littered with this, okay? I'm tempted to say he's more of a gaming expert than I am. But then everybody in the comments are like, well, Will rattled off Tech Mobile, Madden, NHL, FIFA, Call of Duty, and GoldenEye that he had played in his life, which puts him above Gary. And so, you know what? I don't know what Nerdrotic's fan base calls themselves. I did see it in the comments. I can't remember what they call themselves. Whatever you call yourselves. Yeah, I got that wrong. Gary, not a gaming expert, but a pop culture expert. Hey, on that note, I asked Gary to give me 3 shows that I should watch. We're talking about everything's gone woke, corporate boardrooms, not just taken over by DEI, but DEI messaging is what's most important. And he gave me 3. He gave me House of Dragons 2, The Gentleman on Netflix, and Shogun. Well, I've seen The Gentleman on Netflix. Pretty good. I'll be all in on House of Dragons 2 because I liked House of Dragons 1. But this weekend, because he said that, I started Shogun. It's on FX. And so far, I love it. Now, immediately I remembered one of my best buddies has told me before, I have to read James Clavell's Shogun. So it's one of the best books ever. And I never did. And I love historical fiction. I love James McMurtry, Lonesome Dove. I like James Michener, Hawaii, Centennial. But I just never did Clavell. And it's a thing because they're like 1,500 pages. And so you're like, am I going to read 1,500 pages? But I mean, if you ask somebody of that who has read Shogun, they'd be like, no doubt about it, 1,500 pages, you got to read it. Well, I'm 2 episodes into Shogun on FX, and I love it. It makes me want to go back and read the book. I just love, this is about British, trade war with Portugal, and then the way it breaks through into Japan and the power struggles in Japan. It's awesome. Let's take a look at this. I can't do this guy's name. I'm not going to say it out loud. Gary coined authenticity as currency, then goes on Fox and treats it almost like FNT. That's Gary's show, Friday Night Tights, I think. Gary is the chillest big deal, and I'm happy for him. Almost 6 years watching him grind. Gen X Skeptic says, I'm absolutely rolling. Will is half smiling while looking at his producer as Nerdrotic is calling out fat, ugly lesbians on national TV. Holy crap, this is awesome. LOL. Well, I wasn't half smiling, Gen X Skeptic. I was laughing. And I don't have a producer with me. I'm in a room by myself. I've got a return feed over here that I look every once in a while and see the guest. So for better or worse, you should know something about this show. There are no powers that be, or they don't weigh in that often. So what I can say or what guests can say, so far, no notes, no slaps on the wrist. I know this is Fox, but this is also not Fox. Welcome to the Will Cain Show. Let's go to this. E3 Op says the look on Will's face when Gary said fat, ugly lesbians was priceless. Jay Buck says the interviewer, that's me, was great. He let Gary talk without interrupting and asked some good questions. Thank you. I'm the new Howard Stern. Genuinely curious. Listen, thank you so much. The Movie Hangout says Will Cain is based. He knows what's going on. Good for him having Gary on. Somebody needs to be the new Howard Stern. Good interviews, because he isn't that anymore. Not after that interview with Joe Biden. It's been that way for a while. He's sold out and gone soft and long since. Let's take a look. Tastier back in the 80s says, all that people are looking for is authenticity. He nailed it right there. And then look at this. David Hickman says, that is also why Trump has his appeal. He is authentically Trump. I think that's exactly right. I mean, he is who he is. Wears a suit into every situation he's in. Pretty much acts the same. I met him off camera before, by the way. Same. I mean, love him or hate him, he's Donald Trump. Lauren Taylor says, fantastic segment with Gary. I really enjoyed the commonality of what's happening in nerd culture and what's happening in the sports world. As a sports and geek nut, I can attest that both guys are exactly right in their assessments in their respective realms. ESPN is a shadow of its former self at this point. Most entertainment franchises have been dismantled by, quote, the message. Independent studios, both sports and comics and games, are desperately desired by fans. Almost all the gaming journalists sites need to go away. That's a really good way to put it. The message. The message above all else. The message above creativity. The message above talent. The message above the fan. The message above entertainment. Whether or not it's gaming, pop culture, movies, television shows, music, or sports, the message has subjugated all of us. They're not trying to entertain us. They're trying to lecture us because they don't appreciate our business, the fan. They actually hate the fan. And then finally, we'll lean into this. Fine. Yeah. A proud American said, Gary said, don't mess with gamers. They'll weaponize their autism. Somebody says that needs to be on an FNT shirt. Xanaximus says, I can't wait for all the new viewers to witness the amazing professionalism we've come to know over the years. Every FNT. And then Culture Clash says, that was the greatest thing I've ever seen. Gary didn't hold back at all, and Will didn't make him pull back either. Absolute perfection. It was, I haven't held anybody back. Not The Rock when he wants to talk about politics. Not Tony Robbins. Not Dave Portnoy. Not Stephen A. Smith. Not David Sachs when he wants to debate the war in Ukraine or the rebuttal with Rebecca Heinrichs. No, all I want this to do is be alive. Alive. And real. Kind of like, as people point out, the appeal behind Sydney Sweeney. Last one. The comment that I made, Sydney Sweeney and her fame and her stardom. She definitely has her assets. Haha. Brilliant. Sydney Sweeney definitely has her assets. All right, that's going to do it for us today on a mess of a show, but a real show. The Will Cain Show. Make sure you hit subscribe, Apple, Spotify, YouTube, and maybe, just maybe, if we're lucky, I'll see you again next time.